Monsters University is an absolutely brutal film. God, it's so brutal. I mean, it's crazy and goofy and all with its whimsical college fraternity story, its silly characters, and its crazy set pieces. Like, all the dressings and stuff is really fun and easygoing. It's a Pixar movie after all. But at the heart of it, the very center of what this film is about, it deals with some very harsh and potentially uncomfortable realities. Because as much as he may want it, and as hard as he may work for it, the nagging, annoying little question remains. Is Mike Wazowski scary? Monsters University is like the bizarro version of Ratatouille. They are practically sister films, they share so many themes in common. They are both about characters who passionately want to do something so very badly, but are questioned and doubted by society at every turn. Remy is a rat, he most certainly can't be a cook. Mike is a silly green ball with one eye, he could never scare anyone. And both movies have critics waiting in the shadows, ready to tell them they are failures. The difference is that Ratatouille takes a very optimistic and romantic view of things, arguing that anyone can cook, even a rat. It is clear at every moment of the film that Remy can indeed cook. There is never any doubt. Monsters University, on the other hand, well, I wouldn't say it's a more pessimistic film, but it's one that is grimly realistic about the way the world works. Monsters University doesn't proclaim anyone can be scary, it says, maybe some people aren't. Maybe they can be someday. Maybe the whole thing is a waste of time. Who knows? We'll find out at the end. At first, the basic premise and story outline of Monsters University doesn't appear to be that remarkable. It actually seems pretty cliché. You got the kid who isn't like the other school children, the kid who has a big dream and is gonna defy the odds and prove everyone wrong about him. And then he gets to college, is still unable to fit in, and is still out to prove everyone wrong. And then we basically do Animal House for a while. I think it's safe to say that Monsters University doesn't break a lot of new ground with some of its plot elements. Uzma Kappa, for example, serves as our traditional loser fraternity of the story, and for the most part, they do their job. The individual members all bring different personalities to the table. You got the middle-aged college student who rattles off dad jokes, you got the two-headed monster who argues amongst himself, you got the geeky kid who still lives with his mom. You got the weirdo purple hippie guy who crawls all over the place. He's my favorite, by the way. As a whole, this is a solid bunch, although they don't exactly blow me away. We've seen a lot of these types of characters before in college movies, and their jokes can sometimes follow these formulas. For example, I really like the jokes about Squishy dealing with his mom, like seeing them fight over the car radio or her interrupting with the laundry. Really solid jokes, very memorable, presented really well. They're just the kind of jokes that we've seen before. I find myself enjoying these jokes on an intellectual level because they're executed really well, rather than simply enjoying the spontaneity of them. But the ultimate result is that this crew ends up very likable and very rootable, and that's really all you need from them. The same argument can be made for the other fraternity, Roar Omega Roar. As the arrogant and mean frat in the story, they're fine. Once again, a lot of the characters we'd kind of expect. They're overly confident, they only care about winning, they're mean to the loser fraternity. I really like how they introduce these guys in context to Sully, how they know exactly who the Sullivan family are and are already in line to scoop up the next star family member. But when things suddenly stop going so well, they can just dump him and pick up Randall. They establish that there's no sense of loyalty with these guys. They don't really care about Sully as a person. Or monster. Whatever. Ugh, Pixar. These guys are primarily responsible for driving the external conflict of the movie, always being the ones telling Uzma Kappa that they're losers. They're the ones who invite them to a party and then completely humiliate them, for example. They don't provide any sort of new spin on these type of characters, they're just jerky jerks who are jerks. Makes a lot of sense, given what we know in Monsters Inc., why Randall ends up falling in with these guys. Although as a standalone movie, this character turn is way not telegraphed enough to make sense. In general, I would prefer a less stereotypical take on these Roar Omega Roar guys, but the movie does need external conflict. Dean Hardscrabble is already pushing the philosophical dilemma, so we need someone to just kick around the protagonist. Dean Hardscrabble herself is an interesting character example. She feels like an alternative spin on the Anton Ego character we saw in Ratatouille. Both are somewhat sinister and mysterious critics who the main character is trying to prove wrong. Unlike in the other movie, however, Hardscrabble takes a more active role throughout, delivering her high expectations to the freshmen at the start, and then failing Mike and Sully after the Scream canister fiasco. She was always lurking in the background, reminding us that Mike is not scary, always trying to pop that bubble that we are living in. Interestingly, they don't really go for the warm and fuzzy resolution with Dean Hardscrabble. You get the sense that she is impressed and respects what they did in the end, but she still remains stoic and proud. The scare games themselves are definitely the most elaborate set pieces of the movie, and are all creative and well executed visually. There's a bit of a problem sometimes in movies with these competition plots, especially ones with multiple rounds and eliminations. You kinda know that Uzma Kappa can't ever finish last because otherwise there's no movie. So there's that inevitability problem. But Monsters University plays around with this a little, like doing the fake out in the first competition where they do indeed finish last. These scenes are less about being unexpected and more about being exciting and fun, and they do that. I like the first competition and how distorted and goofy the characters look by the end of it. My favorite is definitely the tense library sequence with the gigantic, terrifying librarian. I love how it just completely falls apart and they're like, screw it, let's make a break for it. The competitions show a nice character progression for Uzma Kappa, starting out as a disorganized failure, moving on to a chaotic success, followed by 2 examples of competence. Uzma Kappa has been training like crazy and are finally showing results. One of my favorite things about Monsters University is its theme about hard work. It feels like a rejection of the classic fairy tale style, where it's all about wanting something really bad and just being a good person. Monsters University says that it's not just about having a dream, you have to work really, really hard to get it. Mike studies constantly to learn the technical ins and outs. Uzma Kappa puts in a ton of work to hone their skills. They have entire training montages about it. At the end of the movie, Sully and Mike do not actually earn college degrees. They end up becoming scares at Monsters, Inc. because they work their way up. In a movie set in the world of academia, the overarching moral is about putting in hard work and getting life experience. There is no one better at demonstrating this theme in the movie than Sully. Sully comes into Monsters University with a pedigree and a scary roar. He is so annoyingly self-confident that he can just cruise through with raw talent. He is, obviously, the foil for Mike Wazowski, the guy with no raw talent but an urge to learn. Sully is quickly humbled by Dean Hardscrabble and spends the rest of the movie building himself back up. There's a little of Lightning McQueen here, with how Sully gets shoved into a world that he considers beneath him. I like the more introspective spin in this example, exploring why he acts the way he does. In the final act of the movie, he reveals that he acts scary, but most of the time, he's terrified. It explains why a guy like him always goes along with the flow, always concerned with pleasing others. It also explains why Sully would be willing to cheat his way to victory. As much as Uzma Kappa has improved themselves, and as hard as Mike has tried, he is absolutely terrified that things won't work out. This leads me to our protagonist of the film, Mike Wazowski. Oh, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about him. I said at the beginning of this review that Monsters University is a brutal film. I said that because of what Mike goes through and the themes associated with him. Have you ever known someone who wanted something really, really bad, would work really, really hard at it, and would repeatedly fail anyway? And you support them in their endeavor, but secretly doubt if it'll ever actually happen? You want them to succeed, obviously, but you don't want them to make themselves miserable. Or, even more horrifyingly, have you ever actually been that person? What Mike goes through in this film is absolutely brutal, the way reality has chosen to slap him in the face. They do a fantastic job establishing his love for scaring at an early age, and demonstrating how much work he is willing to put in for it. He puts in the hours studying, and then when delivered a setback, is willing to put everything on the line for his dream. Mike firmly believes that this is something he wants. Being a scarer is Mike's raison d'etre, if you'll pardon my French. In a normal movie, this story arc would be easy to predict. The guy goes to college, puts in a ton of work, battles adversity, to finally prove to everyone he can do it. It's basically Rudy with less Sean Astin and more Billy Crystal. Been there, done that, go Fighting Irish. I admit, Monsters University didn't win me over until the final Scare Games competition. Everything up to that point is very by the book with its character arcs and college situations. Monsters University has a disadvantage compared to the original, in that it lacks the fun real-world component with the doors, and having Boo enter their realm. The whole concept of the Upside Down, filled with monsters, is the hook. I was thinking, why would Pixar make a movie with these same characters and world, yet take away the two most compelling components? The real-world dynamic is the special sauce. I was wrong. The reveal that Sully cheated in the final Scare games is masterful. The perfect punch to the gut for the audience. There's a subtle trick that happens in the second half of the movie, where the point of view shifts from Mike to Sully. The first half is told from Mike's point of view. We're supposed to identify with him and want him to teach Uzma Kappa how to be scary. But in this scene, right before the final Scare game, the point of view flips around. Suddenly, we are Sully, the observer of Mike. We are watching and hoping that he can finally let loose the scarer within. We're supposed to walk away from this scene dubious about it, wondering if Mike actually has it. In a story told strictly from Mike's point of view, this is just the moment of doubt scene, merely used to confuse the audience. But this is actually foreshadowing that things aren't going to go well, something we the audience should be recognizing. This is not a story about a guy with a dream anymore. It's about a friend who knows he's about to fail. We're still living in this delusion that this is an overcoming adversity story, and we want to bask in the glory of it being true. We subconsciously slip back into Mike's shoes. We forget that Sully told us exactly what was really going to happen. In fact, he specifically suggests cheating earlier in the movie. Talk about foreshadowing. Everyone wants the exact same thing for Mike and Uzma Kappa, so the reveal that it was actually fabricated completely topples our house of cards. We're not in the movie we thought we were in. This is why a redemption arc for Sully develops, why he has to come clean to Dean Hardscrabble and then go rescue his friend. I really like the introduction of the real-world component into the climax. It takes a previously known concept to new and stranger places, things a prequel or sequel should be doing. We've never really seen what happens when a scare goes this badly. Like, we've seen doors going through a shredder, but we've never seen the ramifications of it. Mike has made a complete and total mess of this, and simultaneously doing it in the most humiliating and psyche-destroying way possible. When Sully does finally find Mike, they share in what is probably the most important scene in the film. This scene is the reason why Monsters University has to exist. Why this is a story worth being told. In other cases, I could do with not knowing about Pixar characters' college backgrounds. But this scene says something about how the characters tick, something we don't necessarily get in Monsters, Inc. This scene explains why big and scary Sully needs a character like Mike, why Sully can't just do it on his own. On his own, Sully is a failure. This sets up the big scare in the cabin, as well as our final character statement about Mike. While Sully has the raw power to execute such a scare, Mike has the brain power and courage to set it up. Mike is always the one pitching ideas, always coming up with the angle. The tension of this final scene is set up perfectly, hitting all those creepy notes that are needed to make this believable. I love the visual image of Dean Hardscrabble confronted by hundreds of scream canisters filling at once. That sheer look of horror, not believing what she is seeing. She wanted to be surprised, and she certainly got it. I've gone on about the ending of Monsters University for a long time, but I think that's ultimately the secret sauce that makes it work. It's not enough for Pixar to do a fun college story set in Monster World, they have to put in that underlying plot about self-doubt and facing one's reality. The movie does not work without this ending. It's actually kind of appropriate that a movie that shares so many themes with Ratatouille also manages to have such a noteworthy and profound conclusion. In the end, Sully delivers the message that we the audience should have seen the entire time. That Mike is not scary, not even a little bit, but he is fearless. Sure, this message does seem a little on the nose, especially since the foil character had just proclaimed he is the exact opposite. It's not exactly subtle in its execution. Thanks guys, we get it. But given the warm glow of the delusion we had experienced, it's worth stating outright. We immediately buy this declaration because everything in the movie has supported it so far. We were just hung up on something else. Overall, I think Monsters University ends up being a surprisingly balanced film. It hits that balance of having fun situations and jokes, but also having character-driven conflict and legitimate introspection. Whatever your favorite thing is about Pixar and animation in general, there's something for you here. And it even manages to tie in just enough with Monsters, Inc. to make it a non-obnoxious prequel, which is really hard to pull off sometimes. I do think the film plays it way too safe sometimes with its college themes and the characters within, but they are, by and large, executed well. Combine it with the absolutely stellar final act, and you get one of Pixar's greatest rope-a-dope tricks in their catalog. There is no shame in saving that knockout punch for Act 3. Thanks for watching.